Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I'm impressed by the euphoria that the events in Kenya seem to have generated among Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans want to compare themselves with what is happening in Kenya. You cannot compare the two. What is happening in Kenya is totally different from what is happening in Zimbabwe. Here is a video clip that has been taking the rounds. Generation Z in Kenya explaining their position.
What the political class does not understand clearly is when we say Ruto must go, it includes all facets. It is his entire government, and that includes the alleged opposition. And once this is clear, we do not depend on Parliament to make these right decisions. And I say this because Parliament time without number has proven to be inefficient when it comes to representing us. It has gotten to this point where now they have this sudden awakening as a collective after we have gone to the streets, after we have lost lives. So we have realized that we, the people of Kenya, can orchestrate these changes. From where I sit and from where a lot of the youth sit, this parliament is unconstitutional. It is not an impossibility that we could just decide to overhaul this whole thing and do this thing right. Because we cannot have a minority claiming that they are making the right decisions and try to make it look like it's a majority problem. What they should have done is come to us. The way they form all these pressers when they have political disagreements, they should have blown the whistle at that particular point. That is why we are saying we do not have faith in the political class. The thing which people do not understand, and the thing that pains me the most, is the fact that this is a genocide problem. And forgive me for using such a strong word, but corruption is tantamount to genocide. Because when you loot funds that are supposed to take to be for farmers or for the education of a child or for Linda Mama, you are effectively ensuring that there's a child who will not make it into life. There's a child who will lose to hunger. There's a youth who will be lost to theft. The political class needs to stop politicking and start doing representation, because it does not matter if it is anything to do with good governance clips, or as an influencer, as a content creator, we do that for free. There's nothing special about.
Well, we'll stop right there. I think the young man brings up a number of key points here. The level of corruption in Kenya definitely is totally unacceptable. And you cannot deny that the opposition in Kenya have played their role in failing to stop that corruption. But without pretending that I know a lot about Kenya, I can say this much. In Kenya, the opposition, when they had their GNU in 2007 to 2012, they did implement a number of democratic reforms that made those elections in Kenya ever since. They were not free, fair, and credible, but at least there was some semblance of the process being free, fair, and credible. The same cannot be said about Zimbabwe. We too had our own government of national unity, 2008 to 2013. Not even a token reform was implemented during that period. Why? The opposition sold out. Mugabe bribed the opposition with the trappings of high office. And the rest is history. Why I'm saying that the people of Zimbabwe should not compare themselves with those in Kenya is that Generation Z in Kenya has woken up to the reality that the ruling party and the opposition are working together. They become corrupt. In Zimbabwe, it's even worse. Yet the people themselves have not woken up to that reality. Last year's election was condemned as flawed by the regional body, SADC, the continental body, the AU, and yet the opposition still participated in those elections out of greed. Pure and simple. Why I'm saying the people of Zimbabwe are still fast asleep is that even now, many of them still don't realize what went on there. They do not accept that the opposition sold out. When Chamisa came up with this ridiculous claim that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes, he was saying it for a purpose. He wanted to participate in last year's elections, all out of greed. Here is a quotation from David Coulthard as well, saying the same thing. He is going a bit further than Tendai Biti in explaining why, even though they realized that the election was flawed in 2018, they still participated. Greed. The cartoon there was somebody trying to capture that very the essence of the opposition corruption in Zimbabwe. Mnangagwa with a snug green throwing the $40,000 US dollars bribe to entice the opposition to participate in November 2022. The bribe actually was meant to make sure that the opposition and his own MPs and senators would not complain about what was to come. Because having accepted the bribe, Mnangagwa went on to spend what many people estimate to be at least 5 billion rather, US dollars in bribes of one form or another in last year's elections, including buying chicken and chips for all the povo who were bussed from one polling station, from one rally to another, to buying chiefs, church leaders, vehicles, right up to judges, 4,000 US dollars each, just a few weeks before nomination day was to start. And as for the deputy ministers, 2,300,000 US dollars. And ministers themselves, 500,000. They were all called housing loans. Of course, everybody knows that none of those people were expected to pay back even $1. They were bribes, of course. And the opposition have participated in these flawed elections because They wanted a share of the gravy train. Right now, Nelson Chamisa's supporters, notably Chief Soswe and his Change Radio and Kambakwe, are on a crusade, holding public demonstrations demanding that SADC should revisit last year's election, should table the SADC election observer team's report, damning report, that the elections were flawed. One is asked again, to what ended purpose? SADC leaders met when that report was tabled before the regional body. They accepted the report, but they also decided to do nothing about it. And one of the reasons why, of course, they decided to do nothing about it is that Zimbabweans themselves had participated in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, you'll be giving credibility to the process, as David Colton admitted in the quotation that is going across your screen there. And Chamisa conned the gullible, ignorant, and naive Zimbabweans to participate. And they did. Nearly 2 million Zimbabweans voted for Chamisa, according to the ZEC election results. And 3 or 4 million others in the diaspora cheered and applauded the participation. What is shocking here is that even now, with the benefit of hindsight, many of those millions who participated or cheered and applauded are still refusing to accept that that was a bad decision, that Chamisa had lied to them. This is where I draw the line. Kenya Generation Z is wide awake. Zimbabweans are still in their sloth-like slumber. The opposition, to be truthful, is nothing more than Zanu PF Team B. They've been participating in these flawed elections to give the process credibility, as David Colton admits there, to give Zanu PF legitimacy. In return for a share of the spoils. That is what they are fighting for in this cartoon. Mnangagwa, of course, is right. And since 2008, Mnangagwa has made the bribe even more attractive. He created this animal called pollard purely to reward the opposition, to entice them to participate. But last year he realized that he didn't want too many of them, the opposition leaders, with the aspiration of joining Pollard. And so the price of participating in the presidential race shot up. You had to pay $20,000 US deposit, non-refundable. Lo and behold, there were a number who struggled to raise that money, and they participated. They were hoping that Mnangagwa would recreate Poland, and they will recoup their costs. Alas, he may still do it, but so far he has not done so. So many of those who participated in last year's presidential race, hoping that they will become de facto members of Poland, were in for a shock. But that is part of it. Chamisa's own friends who participated in last year's election, they didn't realize that before they could even warm the seats, the few seats that they had won, they were ambushed. Zanu used the same strategic ambiguity that had allowed Chamisa to be president to appoint himself the Secretary General. And they started recalling them. And many of them have since lost their seats. And Tawangu's friends are now the one warming those seats. The awakening for the Zimbabwean public is to realize that the opposition had the golden opportunity this last 24 years to implement reforms. They did not, because they are corrupt. The failure to realize that the opposition is no longer fighting in the people's corner is a great disappointment. And the tragedy is, well, right now, the opposition is marking time, holding these meaningless public demonstrations instead of concentrating on implementing reforms, just to waste time, because lo and behold, they will abandon all these demonstrations and participate in 2028 elections. And no doubt Chamisa will make another ridiculous claim that his party is going to win big. And the millions who were conned into participating last year will participate again in 2028. And the millions who cheered and applauded, particularly from the diaspora, will once again cheer and applaud the participation. Even if SADC election observer come up with another damning report, as long as millions of Zimbabweans participate in these flawed elections, the opposition out of greed, and the ordinary Zimbabweans out of ignorance, SADC may find it very difficult to deny the vote-raking Zanu PF legitimacy. That is the truth. We should stop comparing ourselves with Generation Z in Kenya. We are poles apart. So in concluding, I'll just play one more time that remark by the young man in Kenya. Just play the first part of it.
What the political class does not understand clearly is when we say Ruto must go, it includes all facets. It is his entire government, and that includes the alleged opposition. And once this is clear,
the alleged opposition, we cannot pretend that we still have a quality opposition in Zimbabwe. We don't. If the opposition has been on the political stage these last 24 years, including 5 in the GNU, and they failed to implement even one token reform, and they're the ones who keep participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy, it is shocking that anyone can still be so naive as to believe that the opposition is still fighting in the people's corner. It's not. I've got just one comment here from a listener out there, which I'll post. And he's saying there, so what do you want the people to do? Join Zanu PF? Well, I think this is another typical example of somebody who really refused to accept the very point that the young man in that video clip was trying to say. If the opposition is now Zanu PF Team B in all but name, in that they failed to implement any reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging, and they've been participating in flawed elections, knowing that that will give Zanu PF legitimacy because Zanu PF is bribing them. Why should you continue to support that opposition? Both Zanu PF and Zanu PF Team B are one and the same thing. I think at the heart of your problem is the failure to accept that Chamisa lied about implementing the reforms, about plugging these vote rigging loopholes. And this is not the first time that he's done it. 2018, he made a similar lie. He claimed that MDC alliance had stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Of course, he was lying. The way we keep on believing that Chamisa will deliver the democratic change and change the political system in Zimbabwe is the heart of our problem. That is the sloth-like slumber that the people of Zimbabwe are in. If you go back to the 1990s, when the people of Zimbabwe realized, 20 years after independence, that Zanu PF will never change. Zanu PF will keep, as long as they're able to rig the elections, they'll stay in power. So the argument then was, what are we going to do? And the solution was very clear. We have got to get an opposition that is going to implement the reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That was the argument. And so the people risked lives, livelihoods, limbs to vote the opposition for the primary purpose of implementing reforms. And in the last 24 years, you cannot deny that the opportunity to implement reform was there. Why did then the opposition fail to implement even one token reform? Because they were bribed. And to fail to understand that beggars belief. If you seriously think that by saying the opposition has failed, you are joining Zanu PF, you know, that is part of the slumber. You really are not, you are refusing to think. The opposition was, people have risked everything to elect the opposition for the primary purpose of making sure that they implement reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. When they got anywhere near power, they were bribed. And so ever since, they've been doing exactly what Zanu PF wanted them to do, because Zanu PF has been bribing them. To fail to understand that, to fail to accept that Chamisa was lying, a blatant lie, saying that I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. I mean, it beggars belief. Chamisa did not even deploy election agents at all the polling stations. Something that is common sense. He had the money to do so. He didn't bother to do it. He pocketed the money. And to still believe that if you say Chamisa lied, you must belong to Zanu PF. Well, what can I say? We are not ready for a meaningful change in Zimbabwe. And to keep comparing ourselves with what is happening in Kenya, I think it's naive, to say the least. Here's another comment from somebody who's listening to out there. The purposes of Chamisa as opposition were genuinely anti-Zanu PF. But Savangu came to undo all the good work. I think this is typical of this mentality where you find a scapegoat for justifying what has happened, whether you like to admit it or not. Chamisa lied in 2018, but he had their stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That is a fact. Was Savangu there? Chamisa and company failed to implement even one token reform during the GNU. That was their golden opportunity to implement reforms. Was Savangu there? Savangu stepped in after the 2023 election results were declared. After all those triple C members who had won the seats during those elections had defied SADC and the AU, who had said those election process was flawed and illegal. And they went ahead and took up their seats out of greed. Just that before they had had enough time to warm those seats, that is when Savangu stepped in, started recalling those individuals. Savangu was not there when Chamisa made the claim that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Indeed, if Savangu had been there, probably Chamisa would have never made that claim if he knew that Savangu was going to hijack and deny a number of the Chamisa supporters the Great Return seats. Savangu has become a lightning rod to divert attention from Chamisa's betrayal. Chamisa and company have failed to implement even one token reform, even during the GNU when they had the golden chance to do so. There was no opposition, other opposition politicians challenging them then. It's because Mugabe bribed them with the ministerial limos, the generous salaries and allowances, and for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the US 4 million mansion in Highlands. And they forgot about the reforms. Those who were able to speak to some of the Zanu PF cronies at the time, the cronies were boasting that MDC guys will never implement any reforms because they were enjoying the gravy train benefits. They were not going to rock the boat. And that is exactly what happened. You can continue to deny it. It makes no difference whatsoever. I think it only underlines this mentality, this slumber, sloth-like slumber of the 4 million, the 2 million who voted for Chamisa, and the 3 million plus in the diaspora who cheered and applauded last year's election, and the refusal to accept that the opposition is Zanu PF Team B in all but name. You can refuse all you want. That does not change the reality on the ground. You can compare yourself as much as you like with that Kenya generation said. But as we heard from that young man, the generation said in Kenya and Zimbabweans are poles apart. They are wide awake. Millions of our people in Zimbabwe are still in their sloth-like slumber. One of the worst things that could possibly happen is for Zimbabweans to participate in 2028 with not even one token reform implemented, and SADC will be compelled to do nothing as they did last year. Just one more remark. Well, Regis is saying whilst we understand MDC shortcomings, what should we do then? What is your solution or suggestion? And the solution is self-evident. We need to wake up. If you're going to participate in an election, which you have been told is flawed, and that by participating, you're only giving Zanu PF legitimacy, and you still go ahead and participate, you deserve to suffer. You cannot turn around and blame somebody else. If you are easily conned into believing that these demonstrations that they're having against SADC, calling for SADC to call for them to review the report, the election report last year, will be of any benefit, you are just being naive. Mambo Soshe and Gambakwe and all the other Chamisa supporters who are behind all these demonstrations are just marking time. They just want to waste time. They don't want you to ask the question, are you going to implement the reforms? And if no reforms are implemented, we should not participate. They don't want you to look at those issues. They want to make you believe that they're going to have this red herring will achieve something when you know it's not going to achieve anything. That is where the problem is. 27 years 24 years, sorry, and 5 of which in the GNU, MDC have not implemented even one token reform. And to keep on pretending somehow that they are going to achieve anything is naive. As the cartoon clearly shows there, Zanu PF knows that as long as they can bribe the opposition, they will participate in these flawed elections no matter what. Chamisa and company were hell-bent on participating in last year's elections. That is why Chamisa had the audacity to even lie, come up with such an obvious and blatant lie that he has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. He knew he was lying. The shocking thing here is millions believed him. And those millions, even now, with the benefit of hindsight, they will not want to admit that he lied. That is how naive and gullible they are. They want to give excuses why he participated. There's no excuse for participating. The quotation in David Coulthard's book tells you all you need to know. MDC, CCC guys have been participating in these flawed elections out of greed. That is the truth. Regis is come back with another comment there. But what should we do now? Because there is no election coming sooner. Well, preparing yourself for the 2028 elections is better. You do not prepare yourself for the elections a year or two before the process. You do so now. Demanding that we implement democratic reforms now is what we should be looking at. And if no meaningful reforms are implemented by end of next year, then you should make it very clear that we are not participating in 2028 elections and not be conned by Chamisa into believing that he has got another vote rigging strategy, how to win rigged elections. That position is the rational position. In fact, I can play you a video clip of Dr. Nevers Mumba explaining that very point, that we should be fighting for reforms now in preparation for the next elections and not leave it until 2 weeks before the elections. The need to implement reforms must be done now. Let's just listen listen to the clip.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, you know. But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities, authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people. It really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, there's a comparison, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report. And then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are.
There you have it. It's up to Zimbabwean people. The irregularities that we're talking about here have been picked up again and again. And yet, the opposition has consistently participated in these flawed elections under the pretext that they have got winning in rigged elections strategies. When in fact they don't. They were only lying. How many times in 2018, for instance, the AU, the European Union, came up with a very detailed report. And in it, there are 23 recommendations. Nelson Chamisa participated in 2023 elections, knowing fully well that not even one of those 23 recommendations had been implemented. Indeed, Nelson Chamisa and company never even asked for even one of those recommendations to be implemented. Not one. And hence the reason why when people were asking him again, why are we participating in these flawed elections again? He came up with a lie. In fact, it wasn't the only lie. Whenever the opposition we ask, why are you participating in these flawed elections? When you, at the end of the day, will be the one who will be saying the elections were rigged. Their reply was very typical. Zanu PF is rigging because they know they're going to lose these elections. We are going to win these elections. We've got strategies of how to win these elections. What is shocking here is that no one could ever explain what strategies do you have. Even those individuals in suburbs like Mount Pleasant, Borodale, whom you would think they are better informed than my uncle or my aunt in the rural backwaters, believed these lies. Indeed, they are the ones who were voting for these people. They never questioned them. That's how naive and gullible they are. The millions of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, they should be better informed than my uncle and aunt in the rural backwaters. But they're the ones who were cheering and applauding, participating in these flawed elections. Then you turn around and expect SADC should step in and deny Zanu PF legitimacy. It's the most ridiculous argument you could ever think of. If you Zimbabweans themselves keep participating in these flawed elections, what do you want SADC to do? Indeed, soon after the 23 elections, people like Tendai Biti are on record saying that the seats that the opposition won in these areas were in liberated zones. The election process was free, fair, and credible. The opposition should not give up these liberated zones. Of course, he was talking nonsense. Tendai Biti himself was disappointed that he was not standing in those elections. He stood in the past for the same reason of greed. You cannot say the elections in those areas were free, fair, and credible. That's nonsense. The voters' roll is a universal document. Zanu PF ZEC failed to produce a verified voters' roll. Team Pachedu showed that the voters' roll was in shambles, not only in rural areas, in urban centers too. The opposition, Chamisa and company, participated regardless because they were after the few seats they knew Zanu PF is giving away to entice the opposition to participate. How some people keep on burying their heads in the sand and pretending they don't see what is happening beggars belief. That is one of the problems we have in Zimbabwe. Even those whom one would expect to know better. I think that is the disappointment in Zimbabwe. I'll just show one more comment from somebody. You are and have been very much opposed to the Zanu PF. Have you ever advised them not to participate? Let us have unity and not blame. Well, I think you're asking whether or not I've advised the opposition not to participate. It's not only me who have advised them. SADC is on record. They held a special summit in June 2018, in which they called and they told Tsvangirai and company into their faces that if you participate in these flawed elections, you will lose. They wanted reforms implemented before the elections. Morgan Tsvangirai and company did not listen. So if Morgan Tsvangirai would not listen to SADC, I don't think it would be naive to expect they would listen to an individual like me. But publicly, I have spoken, and so have many others, condemning this process of participating in flawed elections. And like I said, in 2018, the European Union did observe the elections. They came up with a damning report saying the process was flawed. These are the reforms you need. Did they listen? Of course not. SADC have come up with a damning report. Has Chamisa and company listened? Of course not. This is what we're talking about here. They're busy marking time, asking SADC to retable that damning report again, as if that will change anything. They're just trying to waste time. And in a few months' time, they'll give that up and start campaigning for 2028 and telling the people that this time they're going to win. They're going to win big because they've got new strategies of how to win rigged elections. And alas, the 4 million, the millions of people, Zimbabweans who believed Chamisa last year, will believe him again. And the millions who cheered and applauded would cheer and applaud again. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for joining, being able to join me today on this issue. I think this is a burning issue that we Zimbabweans have got to really open our eyes and deal with. Because 44 years of rigged elections is not a joke. And if we are not careful, we'll be talking of 48 years of rigged elections, because we would have participated in another flawed election, only to perpetuate our own suffering. That's the tragedy of Zimbabwe. Thank you again, and have a good day.